Thanks everybody for joining our panel discussion, Public Duty, Private Danger, Ensuring Safety for Candidates and Elected Officials. I'm Michelle Thimius, pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Midwestern Regional Director at Run for Something, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. Now, I'm going to be honest, we decided on the theme of this panel before one of the most protected political figures in the world was shot at a political rally. We're not clairvoyant, but we were hearing from some of our young progressive candidates about some of the threats that they're facing. And it turns out they're part of a very unfortunate trend. According to the National League of Cities report, 8 in 10 surveyed elected officials report that they have experienced harassment, threats, and violence. Simply put, the need for our candidates and elected officials to protect themselves is more important than ever. So that's why we're here. I'm joined by 3 incredible leaders who unfortunately have had to think about this topic as elected officials and as candidates. They have some valuable insights on how to prioritize safety while remaining accessible to voters and constituents. I'll let them each introduce themselves and share any additional information they'd like about their own experience with this topic, and then we'll move into some questions that I've prepared. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Wisconsin State Representative Kristina Shelton.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristina Shelton. I represent the city of Green Bay and the state assembly, the Statehouse here in Wisconsin. I'm coming to you from La Follette High School today. I'm here for the Wisconsin Public Education Network Summit. So taking a break from a summit to join you all to talk about this really important issue. And I'm here at the summit because I'm an educator and a mom of 2 teenagers. And I started my political career, I'm giving air quotes because I never thought I'd be doing this as an educator, right? I'm a teacher. I sort of got my entry into being an elected official from a school board perspective in the Green Bay School District, and then to the assembly in a non-traditional way. And I really started as an activist and as a community member. So in terms of intimidation and some of the threats that we see in community, I'd really seen that from the organizer side, but certainly seeing that from the elected side has been very eye-opening. I'm excited today to be able to talk a little bit about this, and I'll give you a couple insights on why I think this is so important. Number one, when I was on the Green Bay School Board, this was at the height of the COVID pandemic. And we were in a school board meeting that was being streamed on YouTube with 3,000 people watching it online when we were talking about whether students should go virtual or not. And as you remember that time, everybody had an opinion. And I remember a friend texting me and saying, there's people on Facebook who are planning a protest at your house tomorrow. And the next day I was going to be going down to the Capitol, and that was the day of the insurrection on January 6th. And that was the first week that I took office in the state assembly. So I've been sort of in the middle of all of this, like many of us experiencing this firsthand. And I think it's really important that we talk about this because this is a real barrier for folks when they think about this work and their entry into it and if it's the right choice for them. So I'm really excited to hear from the other panelists today. And again, thank you for the time to join you all and to share this space.
Thank you so much, Kristina. Next, we're going to turn to the Vice President of the Round Rock, Texas School Board, Tiffanie Harrison.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Kristina, for sharing. My name is Tiffanie Harrison. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a school board member in Round Rock ISD in Texas, which we know to frequently be a hostile state anyway. I went straight from the classroom to the boardroom in 2020. I was a community organizer in addition to my classroom role, and I spent a lot of time advocating for my school board and my district to see the humanity of marginalized students. And I just thought, instead of having to show up and beg, why don't I just become a decision maker? This was spurred by me expressing to my superintendent that I had concerns for the outcomes for our Black and Brown students, and being told that, and even as I was expressing this, I said, I'm having trouble expressing it. I don't quite feel safe, but I know if I don't feel safe as a teacher, students don't feel safe. And the response was, well, if you don't feel safe, it's your job to make yourself feel safe. So I took that to heart, and I decided that I would run for school board, get elected, and make sure not only I was safe, but all students and staff were safe as well. Now, that was 2020, and I don't think that I was expecting how my life would shift and be turned absolutely upside down. School board should be a pretty simple thing that we should all be able to agree on, right? The wellness and the access and the safety of all students. However, we know that across the country, school board has been a contentious place to be. So I quickly started experiencing death threats, especially as the only Black board member. Death threats, I had to implement a security detail. I have security protocol to this day. It has changed how I live my life in every way, from even being able to go to the grocery store. I ran again in 2022 and won again with a slate of 5 candidates. We needed that in order to make sure that we could maintain order and democracy on our school board. And during that race, I received biohazards in the mail, along with some of the people that had been donors to my campaign. So it is an unfortunate reality that we have to be so vigilant over our safety, and we should be deeply in community with one another. And as we're electing people, particularly as we're electing women, Black and brown folks, LGBTQIA plus folks, disabled folks, what we need the community to understand is that it's not just about getting us elected, it's about supporting us all the way through. And so I'm really excited to be here today and learn from everyone and with everyone. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Tiffanie. Next, I'm going to turn to candidate for Urban County Council, District 4 in Lexington, Kentucky, Emma Curtis.
Hey, y'all. My name is Emma Curtis. I am running, as Michelle said, for the Lexington-Fayette Urban County Council in District 4. This past May, I made it through my primary and became the first openly trans person to ever advance from a primary to a general. So that's pretty cool. And with that has also come a lot of visibility and backlash. I got in politics. I got directly involved in politics specifically because in Kentucky, we had we called it a slate of hate, just 14 anti-LGBTQ bills that came in all at once and had real movement in the state legislature. I started working on lobbying efforts against those bills and accidentally went viral on TikTok, which was a very jarring overnight being thrust into a more visible role from living a very private life before. And with that came, additional backlash, safety threats, death threats, and the real interrogation of whether or not this was work that I was cut out to do. And so I'm really excited to be here today. I'm excited to hear from Tiffanie and Kristina and to just actually have this discussion at this point in time, because I don't think it's ever been more important.
Thank you, Emma. I really like what you all kind of either expressly stated or alluded to, that this is about community as much as it is about sharing practical help and pointers. So thank you for pointing that out. I kind of feel like I left that out of this introduction. So during this discussion, we hope that the audience can take away how candidates and elected officials have prioritized safety as they ran and served in office, best practices for candidates and elected officials for safety in their public and private lives, and then lastly, how to be resilient in your campaign and official duties in the face of growing extremism. Finally, we have some additional resources that we will be sharing with you after this panel. Run for Something, in consultation with security professionals, created a guide that provides practical safety steps that campaigns can take in this increasingly hostile political environment. There's options for all budget levels and campaign sizes in that guide. So we highly recommend that you take a look. That will be shared after this panel. All right, so let's move into some questions for our panelists. I'm just going to go ahead and open the floor to each of you to answer these questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. So my first question: there is no shortage of things for you to do when you're campaigning. That to-do list just never goes away. It just builds. can you tell me why you decided that campaign safety was something worth spending time on? And I know you all kind of alluded to, different experiences that you had, but really to drive the point home, why should the folks in the audience also prioritize their own safety and the safety of their team and their families? And I'll start with whoever wants to go. Go ahead, Tiffanie.
I'll jump in. I think there were multiple layers of safety for me. One was COVID safety. So I campaigned in the height of COVID both times, and I'm still a very COVID cautious person, haven't had COVID. So there was that layer of community care, of making sure that everyone was taken care of. But then the second thing was, if I was not safe, that meant that no one was safe. And so it became very important to me to implement protocols, because as one of the first Black school board members in Round Rock ISD's 114-year history, it brought out a lot of people that said, hey, I see myself represented in you, whether it was Black or brown folks or LGBTQIA plus folks, whoever it was, showing up and saying, I see myself finally, and I have these concerns. And so safety was paramount to our campaign. I knew the precautions I was having to take in my home. In fact, there was one point where I left my own home. My mom lives 8 minutes away, and stayed with my mom primarily. We had cameras installed in both homes, and naturally what happened was every time I would go to leave for a campaign event, my campaign manager would organize safety, right? Organize people to be there for safety. But my brother started accompanying me everywhere, driving me everywhere. And it truly became a community thing. Emma, I laughed when you talked about the slate of hate, not because it's funny, but because we called our people the hate slate, and they truly were a hateful bunch. And we just never knew if someone was going to show up. Texas is also an open carry state, and so that was a factor as well. And so every candidate, I think, should be mindful about safety, especially when espousing progressive values. And it's an act of community care to implement that on our campaigns.
I think, building off of what Tiffanie just said, that it's important to prioritize it on your campaign, especially if you're somebody who's done any sort of visible activism work beforehand that you might be bringing with you as sort of context for your race and your candidacy. And in my case, having done a lot of trans activism, I brought that down with me into this council race, which isn't focused on trans issues at all. But it has, like Tiffanie said, a lot of folks have wanted to volunteer, have wanted to be involved in the electoral process in a more direct way than just voting for the first time. And so you're oftentimes dealing with marginalized folks who are also first-time volunteers. And so they might not be prepared for anything like that. And so taking the time to actively work through with your staff and your volunteers, and also your family and your friends, because when you run for office, they kind of do too. And just making sure everybody's on the same page about how we respond if we do get a death threat, or if there's a threat of harassment, or, if somebody, at the doors, quite frankly, pulls a gun on you, that we have flow charts of here's what we do and here's how we keep everyone safe. It's necessary, I think, for everybody's not just comfort, but ultimately like continued existence.
I want to thank Tiffanie and Emma for their remarks. And I think, just hearing both of what you've been through is important to acknowledge that this is a reality that people face every single day. And it's heavy, right? Personally, spiritually, physically, even the strongest of us that have gone through it, there are days where you're like, why am I dealing with this, right? Is this worth the anguish? Is the work worth the anguish? And I want to just also say too that, I don't want to both sides this, right? Because we obviously know that there is clearly a side here that is incredibly violent, and interested in bringing political violence. But this does happen across political lines, right? Or non-political lines. When I ran in 2020 for state assembly, I primaried the Democrat who was in my seat prior to me, he was in his first term and he sexually harassed a Capitol staffer. And he was a friend of mine. And I was like, somebody's going to run against him, right? Nobody would do it because nobody wanted to, right? When you run for office, you have to say things. You have to have a perspective. You're a leader. That's what a leader does, is you get out in front. And when you say things, now you're accountable for them. I will say that a lot of the threats that I received were actually from Democrats on the left who did not want me to primary him. So I've experienced it sort of on both sides and everything in the middle. And I think the question for us is, how do we find a place to acknowledge people's anger and rage? And can we do it not all the time, but sometimes in a way that really builds on our humanity and a shared value? There have been times for me where I have been able to reach people who have been very terrible to me, and I've been able to have a one-on-one with them and really build a more positive relationship to get to see me as a human being, not just, an elected official. Those are important conversations that we have to continue to ask. Certainly, we would never want someone to put themselves in harm's way to build those relationships, but I think there are opportunities for us to do that, to show people that even if we're in elected positions or campaigning, we truly are people too, and we deserve to be safe and seen and valued.
Thank you all for those answers. That's all incredibly pertinent information. I really like how, you all touched on creating a community of safety, of making sure that, your campaign is safe for the volunteers and for, future leaders who may come after you. And also, to Kristina's point, we just need to turn down the heat in these conversations, and learning how to do that is a really important piece of this too. My next question is for you to name one safety best practice, right? So if we're adding one thing to the to-do list of all of our attendees here today, what is that thing? And, maybe just a little bit about why you think it's been really helpful for you. And I'll kind of open it up. And if any of our panelists don't have anything to contribute to the question, that's totally fine too. It's not mandatory that you answer every question.
Buddy system. If you are canvassing, nobody goes it alone. If you are going to events, you're tabling, nobody on their own. And if what we've done on our campaign that I think is helpful within the buddy system is if we have some folks who belong to a certain marginalized group and other folks who aren't part of that group and have, privilege or might be in a safer social standing, we'll pair those folks up so that we're not sending multiple marginalized folks, and we're utilizing the privilege that some of us have to make it a safer environment for them.
Michelle, I know you said one, but I'm going to give you two. So the first thing is use a P.O. box. Don't put your home address on anything. And don't post pictures of your house, right? Anything that can identify where you live. My second one is I actually stopped putting pictures of my children on any campaign literature, on any websites. I have 2 teenagers, and I definitely connected with my kids and asked them, do you feel comfortable being on literature? Do you feel, and they both commented that they did not. And I just didn't think that it was a value add for me. And it's something that, I think I respect other people's decisions, but it was one that I felt really good about my family.
I love that practice of consent, Kristina. I think that's so important, and we can forget that. So thank you. Mine is kind of 2-pronged. The first is don't underestimate anyone. So my address is unlisted, and they still manage to find me. So they will go through extraordinary lengths. And so it's really important that we not let our guard down. And in keeping with that, you'll hear me come back to this over and over again, and that is the power of community. This also helps to continually engage folks. So, I'm speaking from the perspective of being elected now, not so much as campaigning, but I never go into a meeting without witnesses. At any given time, I have a follow car to and from any board meeting. Throughout the night, there are at least 5 people that cycle through inside and 5 people that cycle through outside. It has come in handy. They are trained. They know when they may need to take out phones and record. And then they also work to build community. In keeping with what you said, Emma, they make sure that if they're marginalized members of our community, they don't walk to the car by themselves. And I just find that so incredibly important, because when you get to the next election cycle, you're good because you've engaged these volunteers and these people throughout, and they really see a shared humanity and understand the totality of what it means to be elected.
Wonderful, wonderful tips, everybody. I hope everyone's taking notes here. I also wanted to note that we probably will have time to take a couple of questions from the audience. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We won't get to all of them, but hopefully we'll be able to pick a couple here and there. Okay, moving on to the next question that I have. Women candidates, candidates of color, LGBTQIA plus candidates face more threats than, straight white male candidates. How have you noticed your identity impacting, your safety and the amount of threats or harassment that you face, and how have you kind of dealt with that?
I'll just say that just from being a casual observer of witnessing what I've witnessed, my colleagues, colleagues in the state assembly or in the state senate or locally, who are in communities of color within the LGBTQ plus community, we have just such similar stories of what we've faced, and we talk really openly and honestly about what we've experienced. And I think hearing what others have faced has also really opened my eyes too, of, how who we are and what we represent really can compound and worsen the violence that we face. So I think sharing those stories and sharing community with one another does build radical solidarity to say, what you face is likely worse than what I face, but all violence is, is awful, right? And we're all in this together. Just the language that is used towards some of us is just so incredibly violent, from social media to, emails calling my office, threatening to be raped. The language is so violent. And I think, we also encourage each other to get therapy and counseling and really work on our mental health, to step away from social media when we can, or have, but even if our staff manages it, they're traumatized by some of this. So for me, I really try to focus on the beauty of the amazing friendships that I've built, even in times of trauma, and just trying to be there for one another, to pick each other up when we're going through those tough times. But certainly it's been, I think I would say, nothing less than soul crushing to really witness what some people have gone through.
I think because I had a 30+ year history in my community, and Kristina, I was an educator, like I said, came from the classroom to the boardroom, had never really intended to run for office, hadn't really even thought about it. I think I entered thinking like, it's going to be okay. I won my first race very handily, and I just thought, people know me. I've taught their kids over many, many years, whether it was dance from the age of 16 or whether it was me as a high school marketing teacher. And so I think I was not prepared for the sheer hatred and racism, even though I did work in racial equity, right? It's just really shocking how absolutely vile and disgusting people could be. And the overt is a huge part of it, right? The death threats, the bloody tampons in the mail, those are obviously very overt things. But I think it was also important for me to prepare for the more covert anti-Blackness, for the assumption that, every policy that may have had to do with something about race or gender or sexuality automatically came from me. To be honest, it did. But, my colleagues were in support. Those were decisions that we made as a body corporate. But the subtlety of the anti-Blackness was really crushing and really detrimental to my mental health. I gained 60 pounds within a year, my first year of being elected. And it took me a long time to realize like I was not okay. And so definitely being Black and being a woman is something that has really put me on the front lines. But I can say I love and appreciate my colleagues. They are ready. They understand. We've had a really violent situation in Round Rock ISD because we have like Moms for Liberty. We are pretty close to the seat of the local Klan as well. And so my colleagues, I have conservative colleagues that are very vigilant and understand the difference between threats that they may face, which they do to face threats, and what I face. And they are at the ready to protect me as a Black woman. So get ready, but don't be afraid. And I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Get ready, but also get prepared, because nobody can do it like you can do it. So let's get it.
Yeah. One of the things that I do want to touch on before we move on from this is also the age component. So in my primary, I was running against a 71-year-old cis straight white dude. And he, even though we're running in a nonpartisan race, everybody that's running is a Democrat. But he did a thing where he came to an event where you were explicitly like, no canvassing, no soliciting. This is not campaign appropriate. And he started walking around, passing out lit, doing the whole thing. And I went up to him at this community event, which was like at a YMCA, and like had bouncy castles and stuff. And said, hey, insert name here, I don't think we're supposed to be campaigning here. They sent us, an email that said, please don't do that. And he responded by turning around and taking the stack of lit that he had in his hand, smacking me in the chest, and said, oh, I don't know. Well, maybe you should take a video about it and post it on Facebook. Then we'll see if it's okay. And sort of stomped off. And like, he did that right in front of the Lexington Police Department table. And like, nobody intervened, nothing happened. And that was a very jarring moment. I know I actually called Michelle to talk about it. And you have to remember that these people who do stuff like that, it says a lot more about their character than it does about you as a person. But there are going to be risks for those types of things to happen, and you need to be prepared to take the steps that need to be taken to both ensure your own safety and your staff, friends, family safety, but also to take a breath. Remember that like, you have power, you're there for a reason, and not to let that stuff get you down, because that just, it keeps people like that in power when they're able to instill fear in you. So, being brave doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It means that you're actually like really afraid and you still do the thing.
That's great. Yeah. And I know both Emma and Tiffanie have kind of already hinted at this, but what would you say to another woman or another young person or another person of color who's considering running for office but is nervous about the increasing temperature in our political environment?
I would tell them that those fears are absolutely valid and real. And I think we have to sit with that and not gaslight people into saying that, or downplaying it. That is incredibly real and a determinant of whether people decide to run or not run. I've talked to so many. I do a ton of candidate recruitment up here in Wisconsin. I'm the executive director of an organization called Wisconsin Progress, and we support local and state candidates running for office. So I'm not running for re-election, so I'm doing that now. And when I talk to candidates and they bring it up, and I'm like, we need to talk about this. Let's talk about how this could impact your family. Let's talk about how this could impact your kids. Let's talk about best practices like we've talked here today. Do you feel comfortable with those best practices? What other ideas do you have? What does your district look like? What does your community look like? That also plays a role as well, right? What is their community? What's their reality? And I think we never know for other people what the best decision is for them. There's so many complicated, nuanced components that go into determining whether someone can navigate these political realities that we're all facing. But I think what I tell people all the time is, like, there are so many good people that you will meet that will lift you up and will have your back, and who will step forward when you need to step back, right? Or that, there's more love out there than there is hate. And I try to think about that every day, and communicate that to folks, that there's so many great community folks out there, and you'll meet them, and not to be bogged down by the negativity. But those conversations need to be had in people's homes and in their, with their families. And only those folks can determine whether running for office is the right decision for them.
I would tell people to count the cost. Kristina, I so appreciated how you said, let's not gaslight people. Is it worth it? Yes, to me. Is it costly? Incredibly. In one of my anti-racist groups the other day, someone asked me, what has it cost you to be on the school board? And it brought tears to my eyes, because it's cost me so much. It's cost me my health. It's cost me my safety. There are moments when it cost me my sanity. And I think if I would have been better prepared, I would have done it differently. But what I have to say is, consider the strength of your community. And I'm not just talking about your wider community. I'm like, who is in your circle? I have 5 best friends. We call each other the wives. One of them has run for Congress. One of them's on the Harris campaign right now. And it wasn't so much that we were working together on my campaign. There were moments that we were doing that, but sometimes we would just get together and I would sleep, because I felt safe enough to rest deeply when I was with them. They'd be watching movies. They cover me on the couch with a blanket. And so who is that internal community that is going to keep you going and keep you good? And who can you tell? There's a lot of things you can't share, you can't say, but who can you say, I'm having a hard time? And I would say, if it's really in your heart, do it, but prepare. I always tell myself, whether it's climate change, whether it's health justice, which that's the space in which I work, we have to be prepared and not scared, but still a little scared, right? Like, yes, I'm concerned about climate. What can I do towards climate justice to be prepared and not scared, but then also allow myself to understand, yeah, I'm still a little scared because I'm human. So those are just a couple of things to think about.
I think the best piece of advice that I was given about running for office, which is that if you're going to do it, you need to have a big heart and even thicker skin to protect it. And that is something that I think and remind myself of daily. And I just want to also second what, Tiffanie and Kristina were both talking about, of the communities you surround yourself with. And for me, that looks a little different in that, like, I've made very conscious choices to keep my professional political life very separate from my personal life, in the sense that, like, we have on the campaign, like, our little internal, like, staffing structure. There is a separate, okay, here's the support system for Emma the candidate, and here's the support system for Emma the person. And we do not cross the streams. And so you will never see a photo of me with my girlfriend on the internet from any of my accounts. That will not happen, because it's not her job to support me as a politician, but as a person. And, I think that there is definitely solidarity to be found with people doing similar work, but there's also real importance in having people who are going to just talk with you about literally anything else, because it is so easy to get bogged down by this stuff. And especially when you're dealing with, like, threats and harassment, and especially online BS. I struggled with this a lot. But I realized that, like, every second I was crying about something that somebody had said on Facebook or that my opponents were putting out there that were just like outright lies, was a second that I wasn't spending either, knocking doors, meeting voters, what have you, or a second that I wasn't spending with like playing board games with my friends or making my girlfriend laugh. And so you have to have both of those things. And so some people, it's easier to keep it together, but it's also okay if you want to keep it separate.
Okay, well, we are actually at time, so I know I had a few more questions for everybody, but I think we're going to go ahead and close now. Thank you so much, Representative Shelton, Vice President Harrison, and Emma for sharing these incredible, valuable insights about managing safety as a candidate and elected official. Like I said, following this panel, we're going to be sharing that candidate safety checklist, and we'll share some additional opportunities for you to learn more about this topic. We encourage you to consider Run for Something as a partner in your run for office. And if you're thinking about running or decided that you're going to run, please sign up at runforwhat.net. And thank you so much for joining us.